All right, hello everyone, I'm Mark Sheskin. The title of this is Doing Synchronous Studies on Zoom. Please do not take the word Zoom very seriously there. It is just a shorthand for moderated.
Can you just hit the later button? Sorry.
Later, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just a shorthand for doing any sort of moderated video chat studies online. In presenting this, I want to kind of highlight a larger context for this, which is I started doing video chat studies online in 2017. The first time I presented on this outside of Yale, where I was doing this with friend Kyle, was a presentation.
Sorry, one more time. That should be it.
So the first time I presented on this outside of Yale, where I was doing this with Frank Kyle, was a 2018 presentation in Germany about this. And I am incredibly happy to be giving a very different presentation today in the year 2022. So like, here's a key slide from my 2018 presentation, in which I was saying, when you think about video chat studies, you might have this in mind, right? Where like a researcher is like holding up stuff to the screen and pointing at it. And that's really not what this generally looks like. Instead, it looks more like this, where you've got like the video chat on the side, and then there's like slides being shared. And this was, I don't know how many minutes of the presentation that I spent on this. And of course, today that won't be what I'm doing at all. And I really want to draw this out for a moment. So, here's a table to do 2018 versus 2022. In 2018, no one in the audience had ever done a video chat study. And Aaron already had you do this, but I just want to do it again for effect. Raise your hand if you've been involved with a video chat study. That's nearly everyone. And furthermore, like, it's more than that. I'm going to assume that many of you have run many more children online than I have. I know several of you who have run at this point many more children online than I have. Likewise, my content was mostly, how is this possible at all? Like, can you get consent? Does your IRB let you do that? Like, how does this work? And it was, how can you possibly do this? And it was just like based on one lab that we've been doing this. In contrast now, many of us have built up all sorts of good ways to do this for a wide variety of research. There was very little information online about how to do this in 2018. Now, many groups have made materials and suggestions publicly available. And so all of this leads to a very big difference, which is in 2018, I mostly gave a presentation. And so far, I'm mostly talking at you now. But that's not what I want to spend most of this 30 minutes doing. Instead, I'll do a little bit of setting the stage, a little bit more. And then I'm hoping that this will be a discussion in which we get to exchange wisdom. And all of you actually spend a good chunk of time talking and discussing with each other. And this is towards a particular goal. There's like a concrete action item that I have in mind, which is at Lookit, we're currently drafting a document of best practices by Zoom style, moderated live. And this will be a best practices document that is required in some ways for studies that are recruiting from lookit.mit.edu. As Melissa said, there's a peer review process in which people look at each other's studies and give feedback, and this best practices document will be a reference for that, where people are looking at it and saying, hey, you didn't follow this required practice, I think you're supposed to, or hey, there was a best practice that you didn't follow. Is there a reason why? And so that's what we're currently in the process of drafting. Special thanks to two people who at Lookit have already given feedback on this. As well as special thanks to Frank Kyle and the childlab.com at Yale, where we've been thinking and talking about these since 2017, including I'll highlight Aaron again, who has been part of these discussions pretty much the whole time. Importantly, this best practices document will also be public for anyone who wants to consider it. So we'll just kind of make it a public document for anyone to read, even if they're not using Lookit. And that really means my goal today is to get wisdom from y'all to make this document better. So how much to interrupt this talk? I really want to make it concrete. Very soon I will stop my monologue. I'll do a little bit more, like, I don't know, 5 more minutes of monologue. But then if you think about the typical range of how much you interrupt this talk, from 0, silence till the end, to a lot. You know, I want your questions. Here we are out here with this talk very soon. Let's chat. So in order to let you know when that starts, here's an overview. This presentation is very different than the one I did in 2018. Check mark, we did that. Then I just want to spend a moment thinking about additional reasons to care about best practices for online video chat studies. And then I'll give one example to get your thinking started about what is a best practice that I think should be more common than it is. Then we'll switch to a warm up in the room. This is where you start discussing, and then we just have time for discussion. And then at the end, I'll end with a thank you slide that has a QR code on it. That'll bring you to a Qualtrics survey where you can share any additional thoughts you have. And there's a few question prompts, but they're all optional. It's just basically share your thoughts. And then the working group at Lookit that's creating this best practices document will be looking through those responses. So why discuss best practices online? And I have something in mind, which is periods of disruption, like moving many studies online, are great opportunities to create new norms. And one idea that I have in mind is we could have much more pre-study peer review and just generally labs sharing information with each other. This is much less easy when you have physical lab spaces separated by thousands of miles, right? It's not like you're going to fly someone over to participate as a kid in your lab, but we can very easily be participating in each other's Zoom-style studies and sharing wisdom like that. Also, as another example, after the study, we could have a norm in which whenever you run a study online in this video chat environment, you post a video of an entire session from beginning to end as supplementary online materials along with your published paper. Maybe it's not a kid, maybe it's another researcher playing the part of a kid, but it's there for people to really see exactly what the study experience was like. So one reason to think about best practices now is because we're kind of in a period of disruption and we can really take stock of what are the best practices we want to implement before we just get into a routine status quo. Another thing is a lot of people have their eyes on repeat participation, especially for longitudinal studies. And the better we can make the experience for families, the more repeat participation we're likely to have for that. Also, and this is something other people mentioned, including Melissa directly before me, we're now really dealing with a shared participant pool in a way that we haven't been in the past. If there's some lab off at Stanford and they're doing whatever that makes families never want to participate in research again, you might be at the University of Arizona saying, I don't care. Those weren't my participants. My participants love me. But now that we're all tapping into the same broad online pool of participants, and sometimes the exact same pool, if you're talking about a community like the people on Lookit, suddenly you care very deeply about how good are the other studies in terms of the participant experience. And then one final one I really want to focus on is if we have some standard conventions in place for how things go, it can actually make the research a lot better by reducing the cognitive load for the child during the study. Because they're not seeing a whole bunch of stuff for the first time. Coming into a new lab space, there's new people, et cetera, there's like new things happening. If we can just kind of align on some standard practices, that can do a lot. And I'll give one example here from a study led by Jonathan Kaminsky, who actually is across the hall right now, also talking about online research, but as part of another session. And in this study, I'm not going to scaffold for you what you're going to see, because the entire point is if you don't have scaffolding of the sort the children had over multiple sessions, it's just visual overload. We asked them a question that looked like this: yellow, purple, blue, or red. And this should just be overwhelming for you in terms of what's going on this slide. But we had children down to age 5 giving us meaningful answers here because we had scaffolded them up across multiple sessions to be accustomed to this type of responding. So at this point, I want to give you just one example of a best practice that I have in mind before we then start chatting. So here's a best practice that I think is relatively uncontroversial. When possible, a researcher should be blind to condition. But during the break, I actually approached Kylie and I asked Kylie, would it be fair to say that infant researchers tend to care about this and do this more than child researchers? And can I put you on the spot? How exactly did you phrase your response?
I said something like infant researchers are obsessed with it.
Yes, infant researchers are obsessed with this. And I can think back to like my time as a grad student and like in the baby lab upstairs, they would like have multiple researchers involved with the session, and the researcher giving the infant the choice between two options would not know for that infant which puppet had done which thing. And then I was busy just solo running a kid who I could chat with in the child lab downstairs. And I knew exactly what all of the quote right answers were that would help my hypothesis. And so the reason why this is on my mind is because video chat offers additional opportunities to have the illusion of joint attention, which can be really useful for engaging kids in live studies. We are saying, hey, look at this bear or whatever, while keeping the researcher unaware of important information. And to show you what this can look like, let's talk about a standard false belief task. I assume all of you know how this goes, so I will call on the count of 3 after I read through it quickly for everyone to shout out the answer, right? So this is Sally, this is Anne. Sally puts her ball in the basket, Sally goes away, Anne moves the ball to her box. And then where will Sally look for her ball? So 1, 2, 3.
Basket.
Basket. You all got it right as far as I can hear. Excellent. And if I am asking the child this, I know that that's the right answer. So here is what you're about to see. You're about to see a warm-up that gives the child practice tracking blue and green as the important information and answering questions by stating one of those 2 colors. And then you'll see a Sally Ann variation that keeps the script identical for 2 counterbalances regarding which answer is correct. And this was part of our initial showing online video chat stuff, Sheskin and Kyle 2018. So actually, Aaron, can I have you play the role of kid in this? Okay, excellent. So if the activity is working, you'll see 2 circles, blue and green. Look at which one is bigger. Was it blue or green? Green, all right. And now you'll see some blue circles and some green circles. Look at how many blue circles there are and how many green circles there are. Which were there more of, more blue or more green? Blue. More blue, all right, great. So here are 2 girls. Sally is in the yellow shirt and Anne is in the red shirt. And here are 2 boxes, a blue box and a green box. Here are both girls and both boxes. Sally has a ball and she puts the ball in one of the boxes. Side note, at this point, it can be the case that I don't know which box it's going into. I've only said she puts it in one of the boxes. The kid thinks I'm seeing what they're seeing, but am I? Then Sally closes the box and leaves and moves the ball to the other box. When Sally comes back, where do you think she will look for her ball? Blue or green? Blue. Blue, all right, excellent. So here's the trick. In the key visuals, that were showing Sally puts her ball in the box and Anne moves it to the other box, the kid would see one of these 2 versions, but I don't see what the kid is seeing, allowing me to be blind to condition. So how do we keep the researcher unaware? Here was our very high-tech solution. If you need additional instructions about how to do this, I can send them to you. Sometimes we got advanced because depending upon what information we wanted to cover up, we would like do different paper construction paper constructs that had like holes cut out in different ways so you could see some things you needed to see but couldn't see other things. We went advanced with it is what I'm saying. So my perception, having talked to a bunch of people about video chat studies, having done review on them for some studies being posted on Look It that are Zoom style studies, is that this is not very common. But why not? It seems like it could be much easier to build into research. So at this point, let's get into some general chatting. And in order to just do a warm-up and get everyone engaged, I have some warm-up questions. And so I want people to answer this with a thumbs up or a thumbs down for each one. It is not supposed to be valenced. It's not that thumbs up is the better answer. It's just an easy visual signal for everyone to see one way or another. So consent. Do you get consent before a video chat study, mostly beforehand, asynchronously, over email or something? Or do you do it mostly, that should be during, not after. That should be at the end of the session. So what do people do? Mostly before or mostly during? I see some sideways thumbs. Okay, so my impression is that that's pretty mixed. That might be worth discussing. That's cool. What about the recording of the session? Do you do audio recording of the session or video recording of the session? Oh, that is not very mixed. Wait, can you like actively raise your hand if you're just doing audio recording? Okay, one. Oh, but okay, I see in both directions. Yeah. Okay, so the childlab.com at Yale, which has been going since 2017, we're just doing the audio. We have some thoughts about this. Some of it is just that in 2017, we just had no idea what parents would put up with, and so we were as conservative as possible. But that's kind of striking, everyone collecting video. What about cross-trained researchers versus each researcher runs their own study? So do you have like researchers trained to run a bunch of studies or just their own? Okay, I'm seeing a mix, but maybe it's towards mostly their own. Here's a follow-up question. Does any lab institute the idea that researchers run any study except their own? Like researchers don't run their own study? Oh, that's kind of interesting because like there could be advantages of that, right? Like you specify a protocol so well that other people run it and you don't touch it at all. Especially good if you like, can't be blind to what's going on in the study. You could have someone who's blind to hypothesis doing it. Good for replication, et cetera. But okay, no hands on that. Interesting. What about solo staffing versus typically 2 or more researchers present? Who's like solo staffing these things? Okay, a mix, but mostly solo staffing is possible. And then final, debriefing with distinct slides. Like when they get to the end of the study, do you have like a really like formal, like let me show you like pictures of what you just saw and discuss it like kind of a presentation style? Or is it like informal, hey, do you have any questions? Okay, mostly thumbs down, but I do see at least 1 or 2 thumbs up. Cool, excellent. Okay, so that's it. Now I'm really curious, like what would you populate into these boxes for best practices? And keep in mind, like there's going to be an official look at document about this that's binding to look at researchers. Like what do you think should be required when people are running live studies? What do you just think is like a good high quality suggestion? And I also have a box there for like, where do you think we should just coordinate? Things where we may as well choose the same answer. It'll make it an easier experience over time, but it's not like one answer is better than another. Yeah, I'm hoping that there's a lot of thoughts out there. Like what is on your mind as something maybe that your lab is doing or you wish your lab was doing that you think other labs should be doing? Cool. Oh, and one final thing I want to say, and then I would love those hands to pop up. I'm kind of terrified of what's about to happen because people are expecting to know their names, but we've been like remote for 2 years and people are wearing masks. So like Aaron, if you raise your hand, I'm never going to say your name again from now on. I'm just going to be like you. That way everyone can just be you and solve their issue. Okay, so yeah, what's on people's minds? Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, there's people behind me, so I wanted to make sure. Yeah, so since it was so mixed, if they do consent form before or during the testing session, something we do is we send out the consent form before and they can fill it out beforehand if they want. But no matter if they fill it out beforehand or not, we go over it again with them as they giving up the session.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, and should I be like repeating any of this for people on Zoom quickly, just summarizing?
Let me see.
Yeah, and maybe I'll summarize both if necessary after.
Yeah, so let me just follow up on that. So a best practice that we recommend for Betabrary is that, although it's not required because IRBs have different views about this, is that you actually ask for sharing permission for video recordings after a session, because then people have gone through the experience and can decide for themselves whether anything happened that they would not want to share. Again, that's just a recommendation, but I think it's consistent with what you said, that obviously you have to ask for permission for participating in research, but the sharing second. And I would like the community to agree that we maybe required is slightly strong, but I think we should all be asking for permission to share data. Whether you share it or not is another matter, but if you don't ask, then it's much harder. In fact, you probably shouldn't later. So I would certainly like to see us, that's my personal opinion, is that we make that a standard.
Zoom would like you to repeat and summarize.
Great. So the most recent thing was it would be quite nice if people just as a matter of standard procedure ask participants at the end if it's okay to share the data and have like standard categories for that. Even if you don't plan on sharing the data right now, at least you have that information about whether it's shareable in case that happens in the future. And then the first thing was about getting consent. And even if you do give them the option of reading and returning consent beforehand, still doing some amount of live consenting with them, where you can be providing the core consent information and then assent opportunity for the child live within the session itself.
I have a comment, but actually it's like a synthesis of both. So in principle, I totally like the idea of sending the form ahead of time, but nonetheless, kind of going over it with them before the session. But I think specifically for something like Databerry, some for ahead of time, and that must be completely live, and for a very specific reason, which is that sometimes parents don't necessarily read it in a lot of detail, and they see something on the form that's like sharing videos, and they're just like, no, I don't want my videos to be shared. But then after the fact, when they meet you in person and you explain what it actually is, then most of the time they're much more comfortable with it. So just to prevent that initial scare, I think consent totally okay, but maybe for something like data sharing, that should kind of be reserved for when you get the freedom.
And to summarize for Zoom again, what's coming out of this is that there's really 3 opportunities to think about asking parents questions about consent and data sharing before you're chatting with them live, at the beginning, and then at the end. And of course, there's some things that you definitely have to do before the study session, just getting core consent and assent. But then stuff about how do you feel about video sharing might best be something that is asked at the end, after they know exactly what happened during the session to be shared, and also you can kind of like make sure they're paying attention to it rather than it being some checkbox beforehand, for example.
Yeah, I figured I would share what we do in our lab is we also send out consent, and then but during the session, no matter whether they send it back or not, we go over it and have them verbally give it to us again. Before we actually even get consent, we ask if it's okay if we can record video. I've never had a parent be not okay with that. And then at the end, after the entire study, we actually have levels of video consent. So we have like level 1, 2, and 3. And level 1 is, okay, the video can only be shared with the research team. That's like the default. And then there's level 2, which can be shared in like a class or a conference. So with other researchers not on the research team or for learning purposes. And then 3 is like publicly available. Like we could put it on our website or something. And that seems to be pretty reasonable. We get a pretty wide range of, some people are only comfortable with 1, others with 3. And that's, seems to be like a pretty reasonable way to go about it.
Mike's putting stuff in the chat, so you don't have to summarize. But could everybody in the room hear what Aaron was saying? Okay.
Yeah. So I'll quickly summarize verbally then. One approach, and actually I'll generalize this a bit, so it's its own distinct comment as well, which is I've seen various labs use some different templates for after the study, what happens. So one thing is, here's 3 options for video sharing level of privacy. Which one do you select? But also like, how was the call quality today? What do you select? How fun was the study? What do you select? And those are the sorts of questions I could imagine becoming more standard and more common, which also makes any given one of them more useful. Because if I'm getting, 90% of families selecting the highest level of fun and 10% choosing the one under that, maybe that's the worst study ever, right? Mm-hmm. Because families are just like very hesitant to say anything other than the best. And only in the context of a lot of other responses could I interpret that. So it could be that aligning on some of these post-survey questions, post-study session questions could be really useful for the field.
I have a suggestion, or maybe we can leave from stuff, but one of the things we thought a lot about when we were creating our case studies was whether or not the participants should like deploy the study versus the actual experimenter deploying the study. So that might be a thing for discussion. Whether that should be a suggestion or a requirement. Because for things like looking at studies, if you're using Zoom, minimizing like the line between sharing and really important consideration.
Yeah. And if there's, maybe you weren't raising your hand. Yeah.
Was it me? Sorry, I was just turning around.
Yeah, I don't know whether there's any immediate discussion people want to have on that. Oh, yeah.
And you can actively check if they're actually responding based on and then toddlers on the other end, parents actively play and they're like, so I guess it just depends on what's your trade-off.
And there's a related issue, I think, about for a study session where you know, the parent maybe does consent, the child assents, and then like you're ready to be chatting with the kid, and the parent could wander away or could stay present. What are people telling the parent about, you know, okay, you can leave if you want, but you can stay, versus staying silent, versus saying things like do not interfere, etc. And I've seen a wide range of responses on this. I'll share that in Frank Kyle's lab at Yale, we've had years of success having families not have the parents interfere in almost all of the studies without demanding that they not. And it's just by the framing that we have on the study, where when we have the assent process be like, you know, okay, Johnny, like all of these questions are now for you. Do you want to like do these activities? All right. And we just like have this clear differentiation between adult directed stuff and okay, now all these questions are for you. The parents just tend to not interfere. But there's just this wide range of like how much you have the parent involved versus keep them away. I think we have 3 minutes left, which is both a warning that we only have 3 minutes left, but also an encouragement that we have a whole 3 minutes left. So yes, awesome, hands.
I was just gonna comment on that. I work with 6, 7, and 8-year-olds, and we have them do typing, which they can do it. But because there's possibility for a lot of technical difficulties, we ask that the parent stay sort of in the vicinity to help out with typing, like, oh, where's, you know, the 7, remember to press the enter, those sort of things, or if they don't place the chat in the right place. We do specifically say, you know, do not, we want to know what your child thinks, but we also have to go back, because this is about math, we have to go back and code for parent interference, because they'll say things and be encouraging and do that sort of normal parent interactive stuff. So we're taking that into consideration as well, but we do need the parent there to also help with the computer. So it is kind of very messy. And I haven't figured out the complete best practice for that either.
Other things people have on their minds.
Something I always welcome about including parents is like a teaching assistant, because they're part of the process and asking them about user interface, how comfortable was it, was it easy, we find everything if something wanted to.
Yeah, and doubling down on that, I feel pulled in 2 directions sometimes about the length of the study experience, because sometimes I see online studies that are very, very long. And I think you might have in mind a lab context where a family has traveled all the way to a university lab and they found parking and they've gone into, and it's like a whole afternoon experience for them. And if you only did a 5-minute study with them after they came into a lab for that, they'd be kind of sad. Whereas if you're running a study online and they're doing it as one activity in their busy day, maybe they would be much happier with a 5-minute study than a 30-minute study. On the other hand, leading into this comment about involving the parent as like a research assistant, sometimes like bulking up the experience and making it more engaging and more interesting, including like having the parent involved in some way, having a more robust debriefing at the end, where you say, all right, parent and child, let me tell you what we were looking at today. You've got like fun pictures about what you were looking at and things like that, which does increase the length of it, but also makes it this more kind of like robust, rewarding, scientifically engaging science outreach experience. We are at time, so I am going to just say I received a copy of this text recently, where one person was texting another, did I tell you this kid was holding a live chicken during Zoom? And then the other person says, can I share this with Mark Sheskin? He's writing a talk about the challenges of testing, and this is hilarious. And the answer was yes, which is why it's on the screen. And I just want to like emphasize more broadly, I want all of your information and ideas and stories. I really want to collect these and like be putting these together into this best practices document. I want to go to the next slide, but I see people wanting to take a picture of this. So I'll like pause on this for another moment. And for you to share all this, you know, you can email me or whatever, but also here's a QR code that goes to a survey that you can fill out with all of your ideas about best practices, tips to people putting stuff online, etc. And this will be on the screen at least as long as it takes someone to come up and bump my laptop out of its presenting position. Thank you, everyone.